Record. Here we go. Good morning. We at Greg welcome you on this cold, warm morning. Hope you're warm. We hope everything is good at your place where you are. Some of you are in your office and some of you are at home, but regardless of where you are, we hope you're warm and snuggly and have even a blanket across you if you need it, because that's what I do. We live in an older house and downstairs it's pretty drafty when it gets to the single digits. So I have on lots of layers, even though I'm inside the house this morning. And so it's just so nice to be together and talk about things that are coming up. So I'm going to share screen. Here we go. Get us started. I thought this morning we would get started with one of our favorite picture books, especially for this time of year, The Mitten. And I know a lot of you are familiar with The Mitten by Jan Brett. And when I was thinking about a picture book to think about, and I thought about this mitten because I know you remember the story that, the mitten was lost. And so it wasn't being used for its intended purpose, but then all the animals found it. And as each animal came in, it became very swollen and it became stretched. But because Baba's knitting was so good, the knitting held fast. So in the chat box this morning, I would like for you to put in your first name and tell us if you've been stretched recently. And if you have been stretched, how have you been stretched? And Allison Bemis is going to be watching that chat box and she's going to help us. She's going to report out about what you say. Another thing about the mitten, the story is that it's so great for teaching kids to predict, with features. And we know if you've read this story, that little mouse is going to be the next person to get into the mitten. And I know this year we've had a tough time predicting. We've had in the past we've had some school years where we could predict, and that's really about what we're going to talk about today, is about how to predict and how to think about where we go from here. So what are you seeing in there, Allison?
Yeah, so Elizabeth shared, I've been stretched managing in-person and virtual needs of teachers, administrators, and families. And so, when you're managing those two different platforms and you're doing it for all of your staff and also families and children, that definitely stretches you just like that mitten. You got a lot of people in that mitten with you. Carlina shared, just we're trying to remain positive, to being flexible, because this year is full of change daily. Just when you think, hey, I have figured this out, then something happens and changes changes your schema, changes what you thought you knew. And so Elizabeth said, yes, Carlina. I think we had an amen in the chat box. Christina Sanders says, always stretched between work and home responsibilities. Michelle, over the past couple of weeks, I have been stretched to the max, subbing, janitor, trying to get observations complete, and due to teachers and assistants being out and illness and other things. So she is picking up all of those tasks from her family at school because they're out. And then Dylan shared, I've been stretched balancing school, home, and church. All have been high needs recently. I think that's important for us to remember. So often, your church might have a high need, or you might have something happen in your family and that's a high need, or something will happen at school and take your attention. And we're used to kind of balancing those high needs, but usually they don't all hit at once. And I think this year, they've all hit at once several times. And so lots of stretched mittens. Lots of stretched mittens.
So that kind of really takes us in. We always have this slide up, or we've had it up since the pandemic began, and just reminds us about we have been stretched, and that we're at a different place, and Allison, you were going to talk about this just a second. Is that right?
Sure. And we debated taking this slide out because if you've been with us since last March when we began this virtual journey, when we thought we were going to be face to face and we had all these exciting things planned, Mom and I were, many of you have been on here, you know that Jamie Spagnardi and I work together, but we're actually Mom. I usually call her Jamie, but that Mom just slipped out. Forgive me. It must be a Maslow thing. So we talked about taking this slide out and thinking about, what we're going to have the benefit of hearing and learning about today. But really, the more I thought about it, I thought, you know what, we do need to bring awareness to this one more time. The Mitten definitely brought awareness to how you are stretched. And that was the perfect segue into this conversation. As we talk about, and we hear everywhere talk about lost learning for children, it's in every news article, everything you see is lost learning. And I think that's a really unfortunate title. I understand why that we use those words, but when we think about something a child has lost, for example, if you think of traditional summer school programs or a reason that a child has failed, sometimes we feel responsibility for that. And I'm not saying that we don't have any responsibility. I'm not scapegoating that, but I want us to be really clear in this. It's not lost learning because you've done something wrong. It's not lost learning because you've not given something that you should have given to that child. As you just shared in the Mitten, you have given so much to those children, your teachers, your staff, your administrators, and their families this year. You've had to provide them with materials. You've had to provide them with technology. You've had to provide them with Wi-Fi. You've had to provide them with their basic needs, making them feel safe and secure in ways we've never had to do. We've had to give them so much more. So while there may have been some lost experiences that we would have traditionally provided, we have given a lot to them too that we would not have had the opportunity to do otherwise. And truthfully, if we had had a crystal ball and at this point in February had looked at everything our teachers have learned, our students have learned, our families have learned, and what we have learned about how to reach the individual needs of students, and when everybody moves those lower levels of Maslow's, and we're still there, we're not through it yet, there's hope on the horizon. But I just want to be careful about those words. So when we hear lost learning, sometimes it feels like, oh man, I didn't do enough. What should I have done more of? That's not the message that we're sending. You've given so much more to your children than we ever knew was possible in ways that you didn't even know that you could do. Do you all agree with that? So as we move forward, I just want to keep that in mind. You have given so much to your kids, and now we're going to talk about just how do we reframe our thinking and revision our thinking, because kids have always been at very different levels and different needs, and we're just going to see it in different ways this year, and we're going to keep growing and changing. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Allison. That's such a nice reminder. And so when we think about our guidance that's come out from KDE, it's just like the timing on it that we had we had the guidance about, retention, and we had then guidance about the Sr2. And the Sr2 was going to provide funding for unique needs of schools and students and, clean products to clean. I mean, HVAC units. I mean, you basically lots and lots of open space there on the Sr2, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But when we talk about learning loss and summer learning and the supplemental after school potentials, we think those conversations roll together because we know we have information that we need, and we have some people here that are going to help us do that today. We have Mickey Ray and Carrie Mcdaniel from the programmatic standard side of KDE, and we have Thelma Hawkins from the budget finance side of KDE. And we appreciate that they've offered up them to stay with us for the first 30 minutes of our call. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing and let them begin to share, and so we can open this conversation. They're going to be with us the first 30 minutes, and then we'll continue as a network past that time. But thank you so much. I think Mickey's going to begin.
Okay. Good morning. Oh, wait. I'm trying to. Oh, good
Hi, Thelma.
morning.
Thelma's in the beginning. Great. Thank
I'll
you.
turn my video on just at the beginning so I can say welcome because it's been spotty. It's been going in and out when I turn my video on. So, good morning. I'm Thelma Hawkins. I am the Federal Budget Manager in the Division of Budgets and Financial Management. And I'll just give a broad overview of the SR2 funds. If you have been involved with SR1 in your district, this is probably going to be repetitive, but it's always good to hear again. So, and Mickey's going to be sharing the screen for me today. Okay. So, the ESSER2 funds were awarded under the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act on December, I think 26 it was, which provided additional funding for schools and districts to provide additional support for COVID-related expenditures they may have incurred above their daily district uses of funds. Okay, next slide. And so, like I said, I'll just give a general overview of the ESSA funds, talk about the allowable uses of funds, and the release of funds. Okay, so ESSER2 funds are available to K-12, public K-12 schools. It's the same that was allowed under ESSER1. ESSER2, the same permissible uses. However, under ESSER2, there were 3 additional uses that were highlighted, and it was the learning loss and assessments. They kind of bundled those together. Any facilities type uses, and also structural uses. So, districts lots of districts were glad about this next one. There was no equitable services requirement for districts. Under ESSER 1, there was a lot of confusion regarding that equitable services piece. I think within a 4-month time period, the feds had changed that equitable services requirement 3 different times. So that was a little bit of a headache for districts, but there's no equitable services requirement for districts, which means they maintain 100% of their ESSER2 funds. A new set of assurances will need to be completed by the superintendent, and also a spending plan. And both of those documents will be due May 15th. We figured we'd just give districts additional time planning because it's large sums of money that they will be receiving. So we want districts to plan accordingly, and ESSER2 funds have to be tracked separately from ESSER1. Those funds can't be commingled. Districts can go back to any expense or POs generate any expense incurred on or after March 13th, 2020, and the funds will be available until September 2023. And the CARES Act reporting requirements are the same. And so, which means that each year KDE has to provide an annual report to the U.S. Department of Education. We've already completed the report for ESSER 1, so the next report is not due until February 1st, 2022. Okay. So the allowable uses of the funds, and these are the same that were in ESSER 1. And one thing a lot of districts tend to overlook is the first one, that any activity that is authorized by ESEA, and those programs under ESEA are Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, Title V. A district can use their funds if an activity is allowed under any of those federal programs, it's allowed under ESSER. So if a district decides to use all of their ESSER funds for Title II supporting effective instruction, they can do that. And also the same with IDEA. you can, if the fund IDA Perkins and McKinney-Vento, which is the homeless program. So if the district decides that they want to use all of their ESSER funds to support for any activities under those programs, they can. So it's a wide range of uses in addition to the allowable uses that was in the guidance. And so I'm not going to read through all these, and Mickey can put the PowerPoint in a chat when we're finished so you can have it. But the coordination and preparation of and responses that are COVID related. Some of these are COVID related, and then some are just in general, providing principals and other leaders with resources to address individual school needs. So, that's not COVID related, but it's just another general use of funds, which is something districts are already doing. And so, Mickey, the next slide. And there are all of these, and then some are specific to COVID related purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean facilities, and planning for the long term closures and the sanitation, and just uses of funds to prepare for COVID related. So for reopening schools and expenses like that. Some of those were COVID related, but once again, you can use those funds for, any academic instructional purpose, So if I know districts for the Sr2 funds, because some districts receive 3 to 4 times the amount that they received with ESSER one. And so they're trying to really plan and think, trying to do things outside the box, but just make sure they're aligned with the allowable uses. And I think just thinking about how you use your regular federal program funds, just think about expanding those services because, they're to support um, teachers and students and administrators. So think about, how do you want to expand that? Because some districts have been focusing on the impact of COVID, but just think about how you can expand, some things and maybe some new initiatives that you have thought about, been wanting to plan, and just didn't have the funding. But then you have to think about how you're going to also retain those services and those projects in the future. So since this is one-time funding. Okay, the next slide. And so once again, this is some more COVID-related purchase and education technology. I think with what ESSER one, a lot of districts did increase their students, whether it was laptops, Chromebooks, for at home purposes for technology, paying for Wi-Fi services for students who didn't have Wi-Fi. So I think that's on ESSER one a lot. It seems as though a lot of them focus on that piece, and so now with ESSER two, you can probably get into the academic, more instruction part for students. Okay, next slide. So these that are in blue, the this is one of the new um, allowable uses, which Mickey and Carrie would talk about um, for ESSER, addressing learning loss and assessment. So this is one of the new allowable uses that was added to ESSER 1. Okay, next slide. And this is a second one, the school facility repairs and improvements to enable the operations to reduce the risk of virus transmission and exposure. So a lot of districts are thinking about, we've gotten lots of questions, the facilities have received lots of questions about their HVAC systems, making repairs to that, improving, air quality with the things they can do to improve the air quality within the district, and things like that. And then, which the next one, inspecting and testing, maintenance and repair and upgrading. So a lot of districts have been focusing on that piece, the facilities piece. About improving air quality and the HVAC systems, uh, regarding COVID related, to help with that piece. Okay. So the release of funds, so the release of Sr2 funds will be based on the submission of the Sr2 assurances, which need to be completed by the superintendent in GMAP. So in GMAP is our grants management and planning system. It's where districts apply for, submit their annual applications for most of our federal grants. So if you have some dealings with the federal grants on your local level, you're familiar with GMAP. And then the spending plan. The spending plan is just the application of how you're going to spend your ESSER funds. How are you going to spend them? How are you going to budget them? And so those two items, the release of funds will be based on that. Every district knows their allocation. We released the allocations back in January, but we are finalizing the plan. The assurances will be released. That notification will go out to superintendents in the commissioner's Monday email on Monday, I think Monday's the 22nd, the 21st or the 22nd. So that will go out. We had some last minute changes to the spending plan. So if our vendor can get those changes made by Friday, well, then the spending plan, the notification regarding that opening up in the GMAP system will go out in the Monday email also. If not, it will go out the following week. But the assurances have to be completed by the superintendent and then the ESSER spending plan is usually, it'll probably be the same person that completed ESSER 1. Each district had to identify a District CARES Act director. And so that person will go in and complete the application based on however the district decides they're going to spend those funds. And so once that, the assurances, both the assurances and the spending plan is submitted to KDE, well, then the funds will be released. Okay. Then next slide. So there are two ESSER documents that was released. There's an ESSER 1 guidance document that was released back in May. And then the ESSER 2 guidance document was released, I think, about 2 weeks ago. And there are contacts for each area if you have any questions, and those are the page numbers. Also the funding matrix, which outlines the allowable codes which districts will be allowed to spend in for both ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. That's posted on our webpage, but your district finance officers are familiar with that funding matrix. And when Mickey puts that in the chat, those are just hyperlinking. You can click to each one of those documents and download it, but those are very good documents to reference. So, okay. Any questions?
If you have any questions for Thelma, you can place them in the chat or you can call it out. Thank you so much, Thelma.
You're welcome. Okay, well, if no questions, Mickey and Carrie will talk about learning loss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jamie, I want to apologize. Earlier, I had shared my screen and I was struggling to be able to unmute. And so Thelma jumped right in. So thank you for doing so, Thelma.
Okay.
I did want to bring back up one of Thelma's slides, if I can do that, slide 7. Just because I know that your meeting today was focused specifically on the learning loss piece, and then I'll transition to the document regarding promotion and retention. But I just wanted to clarify. So we also have within the Division of Program Standards, Title II Part A funding guidance. And so if you have any questions related to that, obviously that would be the professional learning side of this. But if you felt like you needed to bring in teachers or other vendor level support to assist teachers in preparing for whatever sort of summer learning that you are selecting that would be allowable, as Thelma mentioned. And so in this case, I think especially that B, implementing evidence-based activities to meet the comprehensive needs of learning. And even as you're thinking about moving into spring prior to that summer learning, how you can begin to identify students and have progress monitoring and other tracking that you're doing to really narrow down to what it is that those students will need during the summer. And we've heard, I was actually able to attend another co-op board meeting where they discussed some of the options that they're considering for summer learning. And I don't know if we even need to have this discussion, but I did think that they had some really interesting ideas around more of an academy model where they are going to really focus on a specific content area. So reading potentially for 2 weeks, and have their most effective teachers, some of their best teachers who would be willing to commit to a 2-week more academy around that. And then we know that based on national data, really it's in terms of acceleration, we're seeing that it's math to a degree more than reading. And so then they would have an additional 2-week academy that would focus on math and utilize their most effective teachers for that window. So that was one way that I thought was really interesting in their approach. And then of course, other groups are thinking about, again, more of a hybrid model where some of it will continue virtually, and they could be meeting with either individual or very small groups of students based on identifying standards, essential skills that would be needed, or again, if that happens in person, then just making sure that they have the transportation's cost covered, or how are they going to work that out to ensure that they're able to reach the students who really need that acceleration. So I just wanted to pause there and see if you had any questions prior to moving to that other document.
Thank you, Mickey, for sharing that. And I'll say this, at our last GREC board meeting, GREC superintendents had the conversation with our executive director also. And GREC is putting together a 3-week experience for literacy and math. They're starting with grades 3 through 5, just to see, because it's going to take time, and to prepare a curriculum organized around prioritized standards. And
Yes.
it'd be a core experience. It not be a tiered support. It'd be tier 1. It'd be different than we normally think of a summer learning experience. It would focus on core experiences for 3 weeks, and that GREC is organizing the curriculum, the materials, and things that the districts might use if they choose, of course, but to do that. And it would be, of course, be a cost for that because the materials and the planning. But anyway, that is something that GREC superintendents did discuss. I'm really glad to hear that other people in the state are thinking like this too, because as Allison mentioned, it's all of our kids have had loss of time to learn, no matter if they've been hybrid or virtual. They've all experienced something, and you've given them everything you can, and now we have this opportunity to move forward. But let me just be quiet a minute and see if anybody has any questions connected to that for Mickey. Okay, I think we're okay. We'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
I think they want to hear every word from you guys.
Well, I will stop sharing my screen and switch over. Actually, I should have just, it would be easier to do it this way, but I'll share again. And I do want to introduce Carrie Mcdaniel. So she is the professional learning coordinator in the Division of Program Standards. So I work very closely with Carrie, and she's here today just to be able, again, to explain some of the resources that we have that would help to support schools and districts when they're making considerations around promotion and retention. So we do have a brief PowerPoint. Okay, and let's see, Carrie, can you see that?
I can.
Awesome. Okay, well, I will. Okay. So just to begin, again, this is kind of this is really sort of the boring part, the part that is not as helpful, but my background is originally in policy. So I think it's very important to be clear in terms of the fact that local schools are empowered to make the final decision around promotion and retention. So that is a local decision. But we know in that last bullet, no student would be retained without going through all of the proper conferencing and consultations with parents who would be a part of that conversation throughout the process building up to it, and then also the next steps regarding that work. But what I primarily wanted to point out, so as you're thinking about the MTSS system that you have, the systematic components that you have built into your local schools and districts, we know that at this point, we really have to utilize an effective system for early identification and really focusing on students who are either chronically absent, who are showing a lack of engagement, which we know is, we're hearing statewide that is an issue, and also any student who may be at risk. And then begin to analyze student data to look for the root causes, whatever may be barriers to attendance or barriers to learning. And I love that Jamie mentioned that you all are gonna, within the region at least, promote that tier 1 component, that core instructional piece, because that's an issue again for really statewide and national around those. So implementing and monitoring tiered interventions prior to any retention within the spring, moving into the summer, but also serving students in general across that tier 1 environment in an environment that's going to best meet individual student needs. We do have in the guidance that there should be plans for targeted interventions that may be needed in the spring to accelerate student learning to hopefully avoid the need for retention. And then lastly, considering how you might utilize those Sr2 funds to support student needs and that accelerated learning that you will have to implement in the spring and then into the summer and frankly into the fall as you move into that next school year. The document also has a section for local considerations, and I won't read all of these to you, but I did want to spotlight the first one because clearly that's an emphasis that you already have within your region. So how is the formative assessment process being utilized in tier 1 classroom instruction to monitor student learning, whether that's in person, whether that's a hybrid model, or if it's truly remote? What process is in place for identifying students who may need acceleration? And then if we can kind of look at the last 2 bullets. So what steps can you take in the spring and in the summer to support those students who may be at risk of being retained? And then if they're not retained, again, what system will be in place for fall of 2021 to support their successful transition? And then I'm going to turn it over to Carrie. We do have several linked resources here for you that can help. And I want to make sure that we also have time for any questions that you may have after that. But I just wanted her to spotlight what has been developed as supports. So thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, no problem. So the first resources listed there, and Mickey already alluded to it somewhat, is that MTSS frequently asked questions. So that's really available to you to assist your schools and district in really providing that seamless multi-tiered system of intervention supports, along with some resources related to the 6 main components of the MTSS framework. And there are links there. They're helpful for both systems, practices, data, and those are linked there for you within that document. And then another link off of that document is a KDE resources and support for the implementation of MTSS. And so that really breaks down and links for you some resources for instruction. So there's like a dyslexia toolkit. There's some standards implementation webcasts related to the CAS, as well as some student supports and school supports that are linked there for you. So just a plethora of resources. They're linked in there, too many almost to mention. The second resource that's listed there is the assessment playbook for distance and blended learning. And so that is a study that book study we are doing this spring. And that while that has already started, anyone is welcome to still join that with us. And knowing some of the challenges that teachers have faced with pandemic teaching, this particular text by Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and John Hattie really helps to make that link between teaching and learning in both a virtual and face-to-face setting. And so thinking about, whether you're doing hybrid teaching, whether you're doing face-to-face or whether you're transitioning between, it really digs deeper into how to assess what students have learned in that distance learning setting. And it really empowers teachers by giving them some tools that they can use in all of those environments to really help evaluate where students are and how to accelerate learning. That third resource listed is the distance learning playbook study that we did in fall. And so we have actually packaged that. While we've already participated in the book study, I know some of you may have been a part of that. We have packaged that on kystandards.org, and it is linked there in that slide. You were able to kind of pick that up and lead and facilitate that professional learning back in your schools or districts. If you like, all of the resources are linked there in a study plan format. And so there are videos linked in there as well as an opening session with Dr. Doug Fisher. So those are available to you to use as well.
And Carrie, if you were going to differentiate between the assessment playbook versus just the distance learning playbook, what would be the primary difference there? Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Absolutely. So the study in the spring, the primary difference there, while both of them are centered around that remote teaching and thinking about, how can we really reach students and engage students, the assessment playbook really focuses on some of those enduring assessment skills that can be used to inform those assessment decisions in any learning environment.
Okay.
It provides kind of a playlist, so to speak, of some distance learning assessment tools that teachers can kind of mix and deploy to match those learning intentions. And then it helps teachers also inform on how to evaluate the impact of their teaching on student learning and how those assessments can really guide their teaching moves, so to speak. So it's really giving them the tools that they need that they can apply in distance learning, face-to-face, and blended learning.
So I feel as if that assessment playbook, is so closely aligned to the topic that you're discussing today in terms of, kind of planning for and preparing for accelerated learning, moving into spring and summer, being able to have some tools, some practical strategies that teachers can implement in terms of formative assessment to guide some of that upcoming decision making.
Absolutely.
That's accurate, Carrie.
Very much so.
Great.
And then that next resource listed there. So as a result of our fall book study, we had some leaders from Corbin Independent School District who love the structure of our professional learning. And so the study plan that we developed. And so they replicated that and mimicked that and applied that to the new text that just came out by Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, called the Distance Learning Playbook for School Leaders. And they essentially took that study plan template and created their own structure and their own resource that they shared with us. And they're happy for us to share with you. We've gotten permission from them. We've actually posted that on kystandards.org under topic studies. And so this study really digs deeper into kind of that hands-on guide focused on how leaders can really lead schools through distance learning with purpose and intent, using what works best to really accelerate student learning while really focusing on equity. So that's their intent with the development of this study plan. And it really digs into kind of some of those actionable insights based on evidence-based leadership practices and focusing on equity challenges that may be associated with distance learning. So that's another tool available to you on kystandards.org. The last two resources are really interconnected, and they will take you to the same page. So the listing evidence of learning that was released in the fall of 2020, and the interpreting and acting on evidence of student learning that was released this spring. Currently, there are 5 modules listed on there, and they are centered around balanced assessment. So those modules contain not only a PowerPoint for you to pick up and use, but they also include a facilitator's guide as well as an overview video that kind of gives you an introduction to that module and what's included in it. And so those are broken down by the components of the assessment cycle, formative assessment cycle. And in March, we will be publishing Module 6, which is the acting on evidence. That will be published in March. But currently, there are 5 modules there that you can use for professional learning purposes, either individually or as a school or district. And those are ready to go. You can pick those up. And if you start with that facilitator's guide, it's really that one-stop shop that kind of directs you into how you might be able to use these and implement these. So those are listed there for you, and they really dig into, like I said, that formative assessment process. And so things such as really understanding formative assessment, clarifying and sharing learning goals and success criteria, eliciting evidence. And so it breaks it down for you in greater detail and in more depth.
And that's the thing. I know that people are already implementing the formative assessment process. And so the purpose of this professional learning is more about refinement and context. And so, applying it to the situation that schools and districts are finding themselves in right now. And so the beauty of it is that it extends beyond that time, but I think it is even more critical this year.
You're absolutely right, Mickey. And I think one of the things we've tried to intentionally do in the creation of these modules in partnering with WestEd is that we've ensured that there are places within those modules where we've embedded some strategies, practical strategies that teachers can use for remote teaching or hybrid teaching. So,
absolutely.
Thank you so much. I know that you guys are on a short timeline. So I have a question to ask, and then I want to open up to questions very quickly because I want to respect everyone's time. We at GREC, we know this has been a lifelong thing about prioritizing standards. And I mean, I've been on both sides of that fence. I mean, I've been at the place in my life where I've thought, you just really can't prioritize because but then now I'm at the place when you have such a short amount of, you have a quick learning recovery time that you really want to test. And like you mentioned, formative assessment, but which standards do you focus on? And we at GREC, Allison found that Achieve the Core has really put out some pretty intensive documents showing how you might prioritize and gave a rationale for why certain standards are critical for understanding being able to move to the next level. And I wondered if you've looked at Achieve the Core's work in that and how you respond to that.
So that is very, very tricky waters for us. And,
I know it is. And you don't even have to answer.
No. I don't mind to answer because it's real life. But I am a standards girl, and I cannot imagine a scenario, especially with the reading standards and the foundational skill standards. I have such difficulty saying that something should be given priority over others, because if you want students to be able to achieve standard 10, where they're doing it proficiently and independently, you can't pick and choose standards. However, I do think because we operate in that tiered system, and in tier 1, you're focusing on and you are cycling through all of those standards with varying texts. But when you start thinking about intervention and accelerated strategies, Well, it is so closely dependent upon individual student need, but I think teachers have the ability to be predictive as well. And they know, okay, students are struggling more with these particular standards. So I think it is possible. It's possible to identify what would be essential learning for individual students based on where you see, and I hate to use the terminology gaps, but where you see maybe they need more acceleration. But yes, generally speaking, it's, and I think that the intent of the Achieve the Core resource is spot on, as long as people don't leave out particular standards over the course of the instructional year. Carrie, did you want to add anything to that as well?
I think that's well said. I think you hit the nail on the head, but I think just continuing to focus on that grade level content really aligned to the grade level standards, and making sure that you're thinking about those students maybe who don't receive any other services, because those are often those at-risk students that Mickey talked about earlier, that fall behind or that have often attendance issues. And so really looking closely at the student data from the spring, and how you can move forward with some of those strategies that were shared for summer learning. So.
Okay, let's open this up for other questions.
I think the key there is really that acceleration piece, rather than kind of that deficit thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We're just seeing more and more research that really points to the need for acceleration.
So I have placed in the chat the PowerPoint that we just shared, and I noticed that Thelma has placed hers as well. So if these are challenging times. So if you have additional questions later, please feel free to reach out to Jamie, and I'm happy to share our contact information. We want to be able to provide support. We want feedback on what is needed, and I know that GREC is such an amazing cooperative, and they are in touch much more so than we have the capacity to be with the field. And so Jamie, I would just ask you and Allison, as you have questions or concerns come in, please always be willing to share those with us. And it helps to inform our work and make sure that we're providing the supports that are truly needed and would be helpful.
Thank you. We appreciate that. We're going to stay on, and we're going to talk. I know you're late to another meeting, and
It's okay. This is important.
But thank you. And we will stay on, and we'll get back to you. We appreciate you sharing today and beginning our conversations.
All right. Well, you all have a great day. Please stay safe and warm, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
So nice of them to join us today. So I wanted to ask that question in particular about the prioritizing the standards, because when Greg's looking at the summer experiences they're planning, we really are looking at a very short number of standards and going very deep into that. So I know when you're at KDE, there's a tension. What's what you have to answer, because what if they tell us to prioritize certain standards, and then we find out later the assessment that's been designed a long time ago was about different ones. And I kind of get that, but I just say that that is something we're talking about at Greg. And so let me just open this up and just say, we've talked about the guidance. We do know that we have kids that have not had the same experience they would have had in the last year. Now it's been a year. It's coming up on a year and 3 weeks. So, and you do have funds that you could use for springtime, summer, really all the way till September of 2023, I believe. I think that's the date on that. So, and more funds than we had before. So now's the time to be thinking. And so we just wanted to kind of have a collective time to talk and think together. So just who wants to open up and let's just talk about it?
Hey, Jamie, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Yes, Brooke.
Sorry, I've had my camera off because I've had all my children and myself are on a Google Meet at the same time. So it's been a little crazy. It's something that we have been looking at as a school, and I feel like maybe even as a district, but there are a lot of things that everyone's just been doing the best they can to survive. But yet we've got to figure out how are we going to, we're getting ready to open back up March 1st, which is amazing. And we're excited to make it through this year, but how will we start next year? How will we group the kids? How will we know how to group the kids? It's just a lot of things to consider and what data to use to get to that point. So if you all have any suggestions, definitely open to anything, but we know that the kids have lost a lot, and there are some kids that have been, they are fortunate enough, and I'm thankful for it, that they have family and friends that can help, but then there's a lot that can't. And figuring out the best way to serve all those kids in one environment.
Brooke, I think you brought up an important point we've not talked about. Some kids have really flourished in this environment because they've had the supports around them. But our hearts are out there with the kids that haven't had those supports. But you're right, some kids have. One thing I've heard people talk about with these dollars is that this is one-time money. So we always have to be careful when it's one-time money. But we certainly hope we've got a one-time problem too. We hope we never face anything like this again. Of course, we don't know. But you could hire people then to help you get information, face to face when you're face to face or virtual, could collect data about where the kids are. That might be, that kind of thing too. I mean, I know that you have better ideas than I do, but I have heard people say that they do know that their teachers are exhausted. They've given, you're right. You've got it coming from home and church and school and everywhere. And so how do we come in and really find out where our kids are? It's a great point. Anything else we want to bring out, just talk about with the group that you're thinking about?
Jamie, this is Carlina.
Yeah.
I know she didn't mention this today, but I've been reading a lot about how the ESSER funds can be used to move preschool from half day to full day. There's a whole section about preschool on there and about, expanding and, pushing preschoolers forward. And to me, that's, a passion of mine. So that's definitely something I have talked to our superintendent about. Some of the children who are, getting ready for kindergarten, maybe we can do something at that early age that we'll see a bigger dramatic impact in the next few years. Because one thing we're running into, and I don't know if other people are doing this too, but it has been such a tough year that we aren't finding a lot of teachers that are wanting to commit to a summer program.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're needing to turn off. And that has been just when we've been talking about, some kind of summer school for our kids. I think it's going to end up being, year-round people. Like I'm going to teach because some of our teachers are needing a break, but I'm not sure our kids are not going to feel the same way.
Right. I understand both points in that. Mm-hmm. And so we do have another district that's talked about increasing preschool, and they've even purchased a building because they were out of space at the school, at the schools. And so they've purchased a building and using these funds to renovate an old strip mall kind of building place, and make it a preschool early childhood center. We do have one of our districts that's doing that.
Well, I would love to be able to, I'd love to see universal preschool for all 4-year-olds, but I think we got to pay for kindergarten first because That's always a sticking point for, districts, and I completely understand that. But I think that, if this opportunity allows us to put 4-year-olds who are not eligible for preschool in the same classroom with 4-year-olds who are eligible, that is a way of looking at expansion also.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up today, Carlina. Is there anything else?
Sarah has asked if you can share which district is getting the building for preschool, and I have forgotten which district it is. Do you
Yes,
know?
it's Butler County. And they're creating they're even going to have childcare, I believe, in there too. And I'm not 100% about that because, sometimes I hear a little bit, Sarah, and my mind makes it, oh, it could be this. So, but I think it's an early childhood center that they're.
But we can definitely ask more questions.
Yes.
We'll be working with them soon on.
It's Butler. And with one-time money, that's really a nice thing that you would be able to use that then beyond, because you would have students in.
That I hadn't really thought of. I mean, I obviously knew it was one-time money, but I was sort of thinking the same thing you are. Hopefully this is a one-time problem, but really if you could get some of those structures in place that are so expensive that you then could carry forward, like getting the childcare started, or I know that Warren County and several other counties have the bus that goes around to work with families. And so if you could use this funding, and Russellville does too. So if you could get this funding to get some of those expensive structures in place, I think that's a great idea. I also want to say that Brooke and Carlina, and you shared questions and you shared things that we're thinking about. I think that's where we are right now. And we're a group think tank, and we don't have to have all the answers right now. I've jotted down your questions because there are things I want to keep thinking about too. So as we have future meetings and trainings, how do you group kids is what I heard. And Carlina, I think you brought up a very valid point about our teachers are tired, and don't forget our kids are also tired.
Yes.
I know I've been approached for some summer things I'm going to share in a minute, but I've thought, gosh, I know Jonah's tired. And so I think those are all important things to think about as we structure this. One thing that we have thought about in relating to this money and grouping is with the summer academy approach, not necessarily thinking about next year because we were sort of narrow-minded and because we were focused, not narrow-minded, but focus-minded on the summer academy approaches. I definitely would have that be small group, and also use an early childhood model all the way through the third grade, where you have either co-teachers in there, or you have so for example, if your school has a high EL population, you might have an EL teacher in there co-teaching with you, or you would also have instructional assistants as support, because I do think you're right that our teachers are exhausted and our kids are exhausted, and just you have the funding now to lower to that not quite one-on-one, but a much smaller on-one ratio for students and kids. And so that's something we definitely thought, just in pertaining to grouping, that I would strongly encourage you to do that, because if you're going to be asking for kids and teachers to do these hands-on things with standards and during the summer, I just think that's how that would be really important as you're planning for the funding for that. So
Yes.
I've jotted down questions. I think they're great.
Thank you, Allison. So, and the GREC would follow that model, the GREC plan they were doing, have a whole group time, a small amount of time with that, and then go through stations, have independent time based on individual needs. So we cultivate a lot of those pieces that you were talking about. I'm going to go ahead, being respectful of our time, and go back to share screen again. I know that was frightening to see my, what's in the back of my computer, but that would give you a whiplash. But Allison has information about I'm going to share this with you. It has the links for the project prep, and we have a link for that form. Do you want to tell about that for a second, Allison?
Sure. I'm sure most of you have heard of Project Prep. It's a program at Western that prepares rural educators. It allows them to get their master's, and it focuses on special education and speech. They have a summer program, and I actually know about this just through my son. Most of you that have been to other trainings with me know that my younger son is a stroke survivor and has cerebral palsy and some other needs. So he was invited to be a part of this. It's free. It's going to be a 4 to 5 week program, I believe. In the summer, they can do it virtually. They can come to the child's house. I don't know what the region is for that, or you can go to Western, and it will be instruction based on what the family/school want the child to focus on. So that's how they will choose their standards, but it will be a program that is both a speech therapist and a SPED teacher. And I am speaking to you from experience. We have taken our child to New Jersey for a program that was an OT and a speech therapist, and we could have added a teacher on at that time. However, he was in preschool, and we chose not to, because everything you added at that time costed more money. The insurance didn't pay for it, so it's expensive. But this is something that's offered to children that's for free. When you have that model of a speech therapist and a SPED teacher teaching together, it was a really beautiful experience for my child. So I'm thinking that I'm probably going to put him in this, and I just wanted you to know so you could share it with the families that you serve. It's linked there. She said, I invited her to come on today, but she had an IEP meeting during this time. It's Charlie Joe Allen, and she works at Simpson County Schools, but she is she's the graduate assistant for this program. Okay. I will put her email in the chat box in just a second for you. The other thing I wanted to let you know about is Arts for All. I think I have shared this in here before. If not, I shared it in our Gifted and Talented meeting. Arts for All is an art education program for actually students of all ages. This is not just for younger students in Kentucky, that really pushes arts in inclusive type programs. They just released in their newsletter that they have some funding for special initiatives. So as you are planning these summer experiences for your children and for your families, they have funding available where you could hire an artist to come in and work with some of your summer camp experiences. So again, that's just getting a different professional in there that would be inclusive to all learners. And it wouldn't have to be just this summer program. If you just wanted to have a day and have, for example, something we did last summer in Warren County is we did a mural that then went out, and it's going to travel different places. So there's all sorts that you can do music, they can do bookmaking. There's all sorts of arts that you can do. Just drama. So that funding is also out there and available for schools or for districts or communities. So we just wanted to share those two things that we saw.
And this is just a link to what we shared with the superintendents. And we really did think about what Carlina said. Teachers are needing time. Students are needing time. We know that they need to be face-to-face. So if you're interested in this, we ask you to just email Kelly Davis and Dan Costello, because they're really coordinating this work so that all of GREC is involved in it. I'm gonna stop sharing. So we're going to send you the recording, and we'll send you all the PowerPoints. We'll send you all 3 PowerPoints. We might find a way to link all that together so you don't have so many different pieces. But we want to be respectful of your time. We know a lot of you have other meetings you're going to, and we will stay on. If anybody wants to